Good day. Today is June 2nd, 2021. I'm Western Standard publisher Derek Fildebrandt, and you're watching The Pipeline. Today I'm joined by Western Standard news editor Dave Naylor. Good day, Dave.
Hello, Derek.
And by the always bright and sunny Corey Morgan, our Alberta political columnist and host of The Corey Morgan Show.
Hello.
Are you in a good mood?
I'm in a good mood.
Good. I'm in a good mood, too. Well, we've got a great show today. We're talking about the tragedy of 115, the bodies of 115 dead children. 215 dead children discovered in Kamloops, British Columbia. We're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about some of the broader issues around First Nations. And is it really possible for any kind of change in Canada? We're going to dive into that. I know Corey's got some particularly interesting thoughts around it. We're going to be discussing an exclusive story from the Western Standard. Dave Naylor broke. UCP Constituency Association in Cypress Medicine Hat is demanding that Jason Kenney immediately return Drew Barnes, the rebel MLA, back to the UCP caucus. I'll give anyone 10-1 odds. That's not going to happen. And K-Days versus the Calgary Stampede. Calgary Stampede is on, at least in some form. K-Days is not. And K-Days issuing some kind of snooty comments that I think could be interpreted as a shot across the bow at the Calgary Stampede. We're going to talk about what's going on there with the return of similar festivals in Alberta. And we'd also like all of your opinions on which you prefer. Do you like K-Days or Calgary Stampede more? We'd like to know if you're sane or not. Well, before we get going, we want to thank all of our members of the Western Standard. If you're not yet a member, you could try a membership for free for 15 days. Go to westernstandardonline.com/membership. Try it out. See if you like it. We'd be very grateful for your support. Also, today's show, we've got two sponsors. Today's show is brought to you by the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights. Nobody works as hard as the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights for your ability to own and use firearms. Make sure you check out what the CCFR is doing by going to firearmsrights.ca and clicking Why Join Us. They're a great organization. You should give them a shot. Also joining us as a new sponsor, first time on the pipeline, is Resistance Coffee. Are you tired of having woke political correctness rammed down your throat everywhere you turn? Are you frustrated by businesses that you give your money supporting causes that you don't support? Well, Resistance Coffee Company is here for you. You can now enjoy the wonderful taste of fresh roasted coffee with the knowledge that your money isn't funding any of the woke causes you despise. In fact, Resistance Coffee gives 10% of every purchase to organizations that are fighting for the constitutional freedoms of Canadians. So go to resistancecoffee.com and use promo code Western Standard, one word, Western Standard, to get 10% off your first order. Check it out, support Resistance Coffee, and by doing that, you're actually continuing to support the Western Standard by keeping them on as a sponsor with us. Well, let's, I guess, kind of bring the mood back down for a second here. The tragedy in Kamloops has shocked Canadians from coast to coast. I think regardless of your politics, your province, what class you fall into. Dave, why don't you set up what's happened in Kamloops?
Yeah, terrible story, Derek. This is involving the Kamloops Residential School and the discovery of 215 dead children that they discovered by ground penetrating radar. So that was announced last weekend, and as you said, sent shockwaves across the country. Immediate calls for action. The flags were lowered to half-mast across the country. People just in shock, just can't believe it that this happened in Canada. Brought up all the nightmares of residential schools again, and what Indigenous children had to go through. But many questions unanswered. When you think of 215 dead children, or is it just in a like a World War II trench? Are they individual coffins? This was known as a particularly brutal residential school. Were any of the kids murdered? So the call for changes to the whole Indigenous system in Canada is growing louder and louder. One of the recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was that the government do try and find these burial sites all across Canada. And of course, no action was taken, Derek, until these poor children were discovered in Kamloops. So I'm sure you'll see things move at a little quicker rate. As to what can be done, I'll leave that for you two guys to talk about.
Yeah, there's still a lot of unanswered questions here. Even in the, I don't even know, this is not the right term, but even in the most charitable interpretation of circumstances, something has still gone terribly wrong. These children were forcibly removed from their homes and their families, taken to this place against their will and against the will of their families. We don't know anything about the circumstances of their death. It is entirely possible they were murdered. It's possible that they were mistreated and neglect led to their death, which it would be inexcusable, but I suppose on the scale of atrocity, it would be less extreme than murder. It's also possible that, I mean, we don't really know when these children died. I mean, it is possible that, it was 1919 and the Spanish flu came through. We have no idea. I'm inclined to believe probably the less charitable view of things, but we just don't have the facts yet. So I think there is a huge sense of national urgency to figure out what happened. We need investigators there. Obviously, a lot of forensic work can be done. It begins with finding out, well, when did these children die? Did they all die at the same time? I mean, that would be beyond belief if it was the case. More likely that maybe they are coffins and it's just over a period of time, and we still don't know the circumstances of that. But we need to know when they died, and then as best as possible try to trace them to these kids that have essentially gone missing off the radar.
Yeah. It's important to know that this was a Catholic residential school, even though basically all religions had residential schools for children. The chief of the Tsuut'ina, just outside Calgary, has demanded the RCMP open the books. The Catholic Church open the books and let the RCMP go and have a look-see. So, but maybe the bottom line is the government. The government put these policies, these laws in place, and what happened in Kamloops is as a result of what laws the government put in. So, Corey may have some views on the laws.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a second. I think the Catholic Church would be very well advised to open it up in this case. If they don't do it voluntarily, it may well be forced. I mean, when you have this number of dead bodies, it could be a criminal investigation. Even if, there's a 0% chance that anyone responsible would be alive today. Well, almost 0%. We don't know when these children were buried, when they died. There's a lot to be had from it. But, I think Canadians have recognized broadly that this is a shameful part of Canadian history, that it has to be addressed for some time. But this is a whole new level. I mean, it's always been believed that, yes, these were bad institutions for the most part, that had a terrible mandate, did terrible things, and that people died, but nothing on this scale. So again, we need to know, is this 215 kids spread over 100 years? Or is this 215 kids on a single day? I mean, there's a big difference.
Yeah,
so
more questions than answers, that's for sure.
Yeah, again, so I guess, before the conversation can move too far ahead, we're going to need a lot more information, and we're probably not going to know a real complete picture for a couple of years. Corey, I know you've got thoughts on this, kind of about, yes, this is a tragedy, but it is in the past. What can we do going forward with First Nations? I mean, we can have all these truth and reconciliation commissions. We can, at every public meeting, say what treaty land we're on or something like that. But none of that really seems to actually do anything. as long as First Nations are kept in a legally constricted, almost, let's call it a apartheid with a smiley face, the reserve system. You wrote a column on this.
Sure. Well, and part of it, though, I mean, is this something we've always known about? People have talked about. I mean, survivors have talked about this happening in these places. We've had incidents in the Red Deer Industrial School, they called it. There was a cemetery there of unknown graves full of children. In High River, almost 20 years ago, during some floods, some coffins were exposed from another residential school down there. This was out there. It's just that the scope of it this time is so large, it just forced Canadians who, for the most part, you know what? I think we don't want to think about it. We don't want to talk about it. We know it's there, but this was so big, it slapped everybody in the face. And we have to deal with this. We have to understand just how bad and how wrong this was. I mean, however these children died, the horror is that they were snatched from their households without permission. Can we imagine that today with our own children? It's unimaginable. You get a letter and a note later on that your child passed, if you got that even. And why are there no records? How can you have a cemetery with over 200 children in it with no records on who was buried where and why? I mean, there needs to be some forensic investigation. But more of what I wrote on is now that our faces have been slapped, before we bury our heads back in the sand and strike some commissions and strike some forensic investigations, as we should with this mess, let's look at the whole thing, because we've got a massive problem. And it's the Indian Act itself. It's the reserve system. I mean, we've got high suicide rates. We've got sickness. We've got poverty. We've got educational issues. We've got crime issues. All of these things are happening on the reserves that are still under the same Indian Act that facilitated those residential schools back then. Now's the time, while people are talking about it, because I've had some people get on my case. They're upset. This isn't the time to talk about it. No, this is exactly the time to talk about it. It's time to examine, is having this racially segregated series of enclaves around the nation a good idea? And to be blunt, it's apartheid. In any other country, you call it apartheid, yet somehow here we defend it as if it's politically incorrect to question having racial segregation, which is what it is. And no, I say it's time to peel off that Band-Aid. We can't, I mean, we've got to investigate what happened, and then we've got to hold people responsible if we can. We can't put that toothpaste back in the tube, but we can fix things going forward, and we have to. Because if we just kick this under the rug again, as I said in my column, a generation from now, people are going to be looking back at us and saying, why didn't you guys do something about that then?
I think you're dead right, but I actually don't believe it's possible. This is one area of policy that I don't believe any significant positive change is possible whatsoever. You've got I don't know what they call themselves anymore, but essentially the Department of Indian Affairs, whatever name it goes under now, Indigenous Affairs maybe. It is a massive entrenched bureaucracy that James, I'm getting a call. It's frozen us. Hit no call. Jesus. No. The red button on the screen. I am sorry. I don't know if any of you saw that. I hope not. I hope it was just frozen. Attempts have been made to change this stuff. You've got a massive bureaucracy that doesn't want to change. You've got, and let's understand here, there's a difference between the chiefs and councils of First Nations and First Nations. A lot of these chiefs and councils, many of them are great and they have the best interests of the people at heart, but many of them, at least a significant number of them, they're little better than feudal chieftains that run it as a private fiefdom. They hand out contracts to themselves and family, and they have no interest in reform. They have no interest in reform and losing the powers they've got. And I believe that any attempt to fix this is doomed to failure. The only kind of reforms we're going to see are probably more of the liberal style, which is, maybe throw more money at the problem, but it's not fixing it.
And I just won't accept that, though. I understand this is one of the biggest difficult things. And yeah, it's not just the unreserved ones. There's thousands of lawyers and bureaucrats, and I'll call them what they are. They're parasites, and they are in federal buildings, and they make a very healthy living out of this giant bloated bureaucracy that runs this sick system. But we still have to try. I know what you're saying. You're going to get so much resistance trying to change this system, but we have to keep pointing out. Do you remember Davis Inlet? This was a community that was so messed up that they actually picked up the entire town and moved it down the coast and rebuilt it. And 15 years later, it was just as bad as what they moved it away from. But it took till people saw children huffing gasoline from paper bags is what woke Canadians up and made them act. Unfortunately, we only seem to act when there's a tragedy.
We just threw money at it. We moved it. We didn't fix
you're
any of the underlying problems.
You're exactly right. We didn't fix it. To even react, I guess, it takes a tragedy. And I know it seems
this
futile,
happens
but
every 10.
We have to try.
Yeah, we had Davis Inlet. We've had Attawapiskat. We have this, even though this is obviously much before. It's just come to our consciousness now. This happens about roughly every 10 years, and we all care about it, and we talk about it, and we all pledge we're going to do something about it. And then a couple months later, it's gone until the next big thing happens. And call me a cynic, but there is no issue on which I am more cynical about the possibility of change. I just don't see it where we can, reform the system. Doesn't just need reform; it needs to be completely dismantled. And I cannot see a circumstance under which
I can see one.
Okay.
Western independence. When you're rewriting an entire new deal, that's a time when you can write some new deals. Just to interrupt, that's getting very fictional and down the road, perhaps, but or speculative.
It is the only possible circumstance under which I can see it.
That large, yes.
But even then, you'd still have some of the problems where, at least a good portion of First Nations leadership doesn't want to give up their power, and what largely that power translates to their livelihoods. I just don't see it happening because you can't impose it on these people. These people have rights, they have treaties, and it has to be mutually agreeable. And if their leadership is not willing because the Indian Act is a racist document, it segregates people, but it's a conspiracy of white liberals and some of these barons that use this industry for their own purposes.
And most of the garbage packed into the Indian Act isn't in any treaties. I actually posted all the treaties themselves on my website. The treaties are actually fairly simple documents. Most of the bigger obligations are actually the land divisions and boundaries, or sickly and ironically, commitments for education, which actually led to the residential schools. But the Indian Act itself, actually, for the most part, a lot of the measures within it, we aren't committed to by treaty and so on, though a lot of people defending it imply as much, but that's not the case. And as you said, it's a huge monumentous, task that may or may not ever get done, but I'm still going to keep speaking up and hope that eventually something happens.
I think it's worth banging away at, but I have zero hope that this is ever going to be fixed before in my lifetime. Okay, well, let's go on to something that's got probably a better chance of a happy resolution, but still not a very good one. Still, the Cypress Medicine Hat UCP Constituency Association has issued a letter written to Jason Kenney demanding that their MLA Drew Barnes be immediately returned to the caucus. Dave, you broke the story. Tell us about it.
Well, you remember the afternoon of the long knives, Derek, on May 13th, when Drew Barnes and Todd Lowen were expelled from the UCP caucus in a secret ballot. It didn't go down too well with the UCP Constituency Association in Cypress Medicine Hat. So they have sent a letter to Premier Kenney noting that Barnes was democratically elected, noting that he's well thought of in the riding. And they demand that he immediately comes back or gets returned. I think you may have hit the nail on the head when you said 10-1. I may even say give it longer odds, 100-1. Premier Kenney rarely admits he makes a mistake. Rarely, he's done it once with the COVID closures and not closing the.
But then he remade the mistake again.
Yeah, he made the same mistake he apologized for. So I don't see Kenney backing down on this one and letting Drew Barnes back in.
So I've got some experience with this. I remember Brian Jean tried to remove me from the Wild Rose on a Friday night. By Saturday morning, my Wild Rose Constituency Association at Strathmore Brooks had passed a unanimous resolution telling him to get lost and immediately return me. That actually did work because it spiraled into a broader party revolt. There is a broad party revolt right now, but Kenney, has enough power in the party, I think, to try and keep that down. And I can also tell you, my experience, Kenny doesn't really care what a local constituency association says. His belief is that, well, that CA can think whatever it wants, but its job is just to elect who I want to be there. And at the end of the day, people in Cypress Medicine Hat, they're going to elect the candidate I want there, not Drew Barnes. So I don't really need to listen to these people. What do you think is really the intention behind this letter? Is it really to plausibly get Drew Barnes returned to the caucus?
I don't know. Maybe it's a stab, but I think most of the board there know it's, I guess we're all saying we know the odds are 100-1 that Kenny was going to back down. You can't set that precedent of allowing constituency associations to push the leadership around. They can suggest, but not demand. But it's a step towards the direction of suddenly becoming independent and forming the election team and constituency association that would work to re-elect Drew Barnes under what incarnation or party he might be under at that point in the next election. Kenny can ignore them at his peril, but it's not going to bring his party down, but it very well might cost him a seat out there, that's for sure. But
yeah, Barnes has said he likely will run as an independent. Derek, correct me if I'm wrong, but have we ever elected an independent MLA?
I think the last time was approximately 1982. It was Ray Speaker, and he had been the social credit minister of finance and effectively the deputy premier for decades. And it was in an era before they even had televised leadership debates. So you pretty much actually did elect your MLA. Now everybody, you vote for the leader, you vote for the party. I know you're all going to say, oh, I vote for a strong representative. 2% of you do. 2% of you vote for your local representative. The other 98%, you're voting for the leader, you're voting for the party, those kinds of things. So independents do not get elected almost anywhere, and they especially don't get elected in Alberta. Alberta has not elected provincially an independent as long as I have been alive. Kenny's got a point. If Barnes is running as an independent, he'll probably make a good dent, but independents just don't get elected. I'm sorry. But I think I think your point is correct, Corey, that it looks like this is probably more positioning for the people on that board to follow Drew to whatever he's going to do, be it some kind of independent association or going to the Wild Rose or something like that.
It's just formalizing getting out the door then. We're no longer UCP. This is the line in the sand.
They have to say, hey, we've given you a chance to do right and bring our guy back in. And if you don't, well, we've offered up the chance. That's what it looks like, I think. Okay. Well, let's go to something a bit more fun. K-Days, Calgary Stampede. I really apologize to our Edmonton listeners right now, but, Southerners just can't help but snicker at K-Days. We just can't help it. I'm sorry. Just the Stampede's so much better. Dave, Stampede is on, at least partially. K-Days is off entirely. But the K-Days issued an interesting statement. Why don't you tell us about that statement?
Yeah, K-Days were officially canceled late yesterday afternoon. And they issued a statement saying that after Premier Kenny sort of announced his reopening plans, they looked at what they had planned and decided it wasn't worth going ahead. Interestingly, they had a line in the release saying, we didn't want to put on a show just to say we put on a show in 2021. We'll skip it this year, come back 2022. Could be considered by the cynics amongst us as a bit of a shot over the Stampede bows, which has vowed to go ahead. They were vowing to go ahead even while the COVID numbers were a lot higher than they are now. But it's still a work in progress. Last week they canceled the Chucks, which is a huge part of the show, canceled the grandstand show. So we won't get to see Paul Brandt perform in his hometown. Lots of other stuff like Nashville North, everything like that is still being worked on. They're looking, from what I understand, making Nashville North table seated. So can you imagine all the drunk cowboys sitting at a table and trying to find somebody to dance with? The mind kind of boggles.
Well, I think we're going to have bureaucrats going around making sure people leave room for the Holy Spirit at Nashville North. Don't dance too close, people.
Absolutely.
And make sure you wear a mask when you make out on the dance floor.
One of the crown jewels of the Stampede, obviously, is the kickoff parade. Normally draws around 300,000 people to the downtown core, which, of course, in this day and age, you can't have. I assume 290,000 of those people wouldn't want to come anyways.
Well, just remember how many people died from the rodeo in Bowdoin.
Yeah, how many was it?
It was a massacre. It was a massacre.
Yeah, so the Stampede has been Jason Kenney thought Mayor Naheed may have canceled it already. Well, it's not in the mayor's power to do that, I don't think. So Stampede officials say they're still working on the parade, trying to make it as safe as possible. But, we're just about a month away now, so we've got to start hearing some details pretty quick, I think.
Corey, so this kind of thing does have some split jurisdiction between the city and the province. Calgary Mayor Naheed Nenshi and I think we could probably quite fairly say his successor candidate, Jody Gondek, they're doing everything they can to essentially cancel Stampede or make it as lame as possible, because we're all going to die. Because these rodeos are just they're super spreaders. So, do you think the province should step in and just because remember constitutionally the cities don't exist; they're called creatures of the provinces. They're every power they have and their borders, everything about them is created by the province. In this case, you've got an insane council. Do you think the province should step in and essentially strip the city of its powers for permitting for things like parades and stuff? Or do you think, even if it's a good idea, it's overreach?
We're seeing a lot of really, actually, well, for weenies like us, fascinating politics going on here. And I don't
Did you call me a weenie?
Yeah. You see what I call you off, Mike.
Oh,
but
that hurts.
I'm sure he'll get over it. But either way, he was, Kenny has invested a lot of political capital into the Stampede. And if we try to compare the Stampede with K-Days, we can't. And not even just to shoot at Edmonton. It's a different creature altogether. The city of Calgary goes wild. And we didn't miss the Stampede for the floods. I don't believe we missed Stampedes for World War II. Like, this goes on no matter what. We missed it last year. And it's a symbol of the city. It's something where, it's more than just a fair downtown. I mean, people have parties all over the city. You have those rubbery cold pancake breakfast lineups in mall parking lots. You have barbecues at friends and family places. It's a whole city thing.
The best one we ever had was the year of the flood, because we're all just so pumped to still be standing.
Well, and I think that's a little bit of what Jason Kenney really wanted to see. Okay, we've got enough that we can pull this off safely. There's not going to be fallout. Let's have this symbol run this year to show that people are alive again, they're enjoying themselves again, and they're moving. Now, unfortunately, we got the politics on the other side, and that is people like Rachel Notley, Naheed Nenshi, Jody Gondek, who despise Kenney, everything the UCP stands for. And they, in my view, are trying their hardest to undercut this and make it as miserable as possible. So they can't shut down that ball that's already rolling, but they can take away all the fun stuff. Let's get rid of the grandstand show. Let's get rid of the chucks, because it's the Stampede board, which is tied very tightly with the city of Calgary, who makes those decisions. Naheed Nenshi and a number of councillors sit on that board. And it's all a inbred group, in my words. It's not all of them. There's some very, good people on that board as well who serve, and they're volunteers, and good on them. But we're seeing a lot of political games getting played with this, and there's some people who want this Stampede to go badly. I won't go as far as say the controversial statements of Casey Madhu to say they're hoping for people to get sick. I don't think anybody's hoping for that. But I think they're kind of hoping that it's a flop, and they're hoping that Kenney looks like he has egg in his face at the end of this because everybody just had a bad time. But the irony is, you shut everything down at the grounds and turn it into just a fair like K-Days. Calgarians aren't going to give up. They're going to put on those boots and they're going to party somewhere else. They're going to do it at home. They're going to do it in parks and so on.
Yeah, I had Stampede at my own house last year. That's where I pioneered. So I made my first ever brisket.
Yeah,
I was like, I'm having Stampede. I don't care what the government says. Stampede goes forward,
and it's going to happen.
And you want to believe that if they banned Nashville North and actually social get together part of it, you just bet that every third backyard in Calgary is going to be a Stampede party. It's just going to be what happens.
The other part, too, you got to remember is city council, as you said, they are a bunch of nuts down there, and they're dominated by the hipster class, and they loathe the Western culture. And the Stampede is a symbol of that. I mean, they won't come right out and say it because it's a vote killer, but they despise having to put on those cowboy hats and go out and hit those barbecues. They can't stand that rodeo.
Nenshi in a cowboy hat is as uncomfortable as Jason Kenney in a pride flag.
Yeah, so
it's just not. They just have a visceral dislike.
Squirming underneath it.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we've got a whole lot packed into what's going on here right now. I am, in this case, just behind Jason Kenney. Let's get this thing going. Let's have some fun. Let's get this summer rolling. People are getting vaccinated. The cases are going down. I wish, unfortunately, that the city council loons would just step back and let people live their lives and enjoy themselves for the first time in a year. We'll see what happens in the coming month.
Well, actually, this is an interesting comment from the Albertan on YouTube. He says, Kenney is desperately searching for a grand distraction to make people forget about his abuses. And then Claudette Lecce says, Derek, are you going to invite us loyal followers for some of that brisket? You know what? That actually gives me an idea that maybe there should be a Western Standard Stampede party. No promises. So Western Circle members, we've promised if you're a Western Circle member, you get extra benefits. We'll go to westernstandardonline.com right now, go to the membership section, and you got to become a Western Circle member, not just regular members. You got to be a Western Circle member. I'm going to give it some thought. No promises. I don't want to be too. Grandiose in my whimsical ideas right now, but the idea of a Western Standard Stampede barbecue sounds pretty fun. So that's food for thought. So thank you, Claudette. But back to what the Albertan said, is this a distraction? I mean, this has obviously been a political Chernobyl for Kenney. I've never seen a party short of Brian Mulrooney blow his own base apart so epically as Jason Kenney has done here. When I talk to people in the government, they're praying that a bold reopening plan now, even if it's far too late, is going to be enough to bring people home. My gut tells me that this is going to simmer a lot of people down. It's not going to be as white hot. There's now light at the end of the tunnel. We're going to get there probably sooner than the rest of Canada, but we're getting there 4-6 months. Florida, and they have significantly lower rates of vaccination than we do right now. So, Corey, do you think this is going to be enough to a lot of people forgive and forget how upset they are with Kenney?
It depends on the person, but it'll go a long ways towards it. Just people having a good time and feeling a sense of normalcy will make them feel less crabby, and you're going to be less likely to take that out on the incumbent government at that time. I mean, he needs a lot more work than that the next 2 years. But it's politically a good step, I think, on his part, assuming everything goes smoothly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we're going to wrap it there. We want to thank all of our Western Standard members. Again, go to westernstandardonline.com/membership. Try becoming a Western Standard member for 15 days for free. See if you like it. And a reminder of our sponsors today. Our show is sponsored by Resistance Coffee. Again, there's a lot of the Lululemon kind of crap out there. You support these companies and they push money on to every woke cause under the sun. I don't like my money going towards that kind of thing. I'm fine with the company just pocket the money as profit. But Resistance Coffee is trying to do something different. They take 10% of their sales and they pass it on to causes fighting for the constitutional freedoms of Westerners and Canadians. So check out resistancecoffee.com and use promo code Western Standard. That's one word, Western Standard, to get 10% off your first order. Today's show is also sponsored by the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights. Again, nobody fights harder for your firearms rights than the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights. Check out what they are doing to protect your right to own and safely use firearms by going to firearmsrights.ca and clicking Why Join Us. Thank you very much for joining us today, folks. God bless.